And welcome to Enterprise Tuesday, the last Enterprise Tuesday in this term series. Welcome to everyone who's online. We have covered a number of topics in this series, mostly obviously around scaling a business. We've covered all kinds of interesting topics around things like how to network and how to raise money and all kinds of interesting things. But tonight we're going to focus on one of the more interesting aspects and possibly one of the toughest aspects of scaling, which is around how do you attract, reward, retain, remove people from your organization as you grow. So I'm Andrew Hatcher. I'm the mentor in residence at the Judge Business School Entrepreneurship Centre, and we are hosting this event alongside all kinds of other events we run at the Entrepreneurship Centre. As I said, this is the last Enterprise Tuesday for this term, but we will be back with a vengeance next term in October with a whole new series of interesting interactions. So book your place early for next term. I'm very, very pleased and honoured to have three people to throw questions at this evening. We have Becky Balzano, who has, I'd say, an interesting view because she has this angle of understanding many companies. She looks in and assists companies with all kinds of productivity and what's called presenteeism type events. So she's going to give us an interesting view from multiple companies, we hope. Then we have Mahyar, who comes from Deepcell. Now, Mahyar, you may have guessed, is not in this country. He is joining us from California, so it is early morning for him. So thank you, Mahyar, for coming for us. And Mahyar is the CEO of Deepcell. I won't try and be an ultimate scientist, but I saw that basically you identify and isolate cells. That's about as far as I'm going to go. You have to explain that to us all in simpler detail. And then last but not least, we have Peter Fish. He's also CEO of Mendelian, which is effectively a company that's looking for solutions to rare diseases. I'm not going to go any further with that one either. Perhaps I could get everyone just to give us a kind of a simple overview, perhaps, of their view. Perhaps you can tell us about when you were recruited and why you were recruited into perhaps your first job or any particular job, to just give us a sense of what it was like for you when you started. And let's start with Peter. Can you remember being recruited? Perhaps the worst recruitment or the best recruitment of your life, and kind of what does it feel like?
Thanks, Andrew. That's it's not an easy question for me to answer because I've actually never been recruited. Possibly this current role is one that I have, which is fairly recent, although I was quite well connected. I've been an entrepreneur basically from my school days, so I've built companies from then. But the current role, I was recruited in as CEO because I'd known the company. I was an investor in the company. They were looking for someone to take them to the next step, and I was, I think, a natural step at that point. So let me maybe hand this one over to someone else.
No, fair. Tell us a bit more about Mendelian as the process. What does it do? And so you can go deeper than my very simple explanation.
Great, I'll do so quickly. Thanks, Andrew. So basically, Mendelian is a company that builds software as a medical device that integrate into electronic health records within the NHS specifically. We scan through millions of patient records and we identify patterns that could be indicating patients that have undiagnosed rare diseases. We then flag those patients up to clinicians and help them with the next steps on that journey. So we've been going for about 7 years in the UK. We've got good penetration into the NHS now. We've got some great pilots running with some of the big genetics units around the country. And it's really off to a good start. Where we are from a team point of view, we're sitting at about 18, sometimes 20 people in the team, but we are scaling at the moment. And so we have got some of the issues on hand as we currently speak. And the product is fitting in neatly. So we really are at that pivot point of hopefully jumping up a number of notches and scaling up. So this is quite timeous on my side.
Fantastic. That's brilliant. You are a middle player. So I'm going to Becky. Not that Becky, you're a small player, but you're not part of a large organization. So Becky, tell us about what you do, and if you can, tell us about your recruitment experience, if there ever was one. Maybe you never got recruited either. Who knows?
I have actually been recruited. One of my first roles was actually for Cambridge University for the Cambridge International Examination. So I remember that back in quite a while ago, being recruited and having a very traditional style interview with that typical question of what's your 5-year plan, and thinking, well, I don't really have one at the moment. I'm not really sure, not being very prepared for that question. But yeah, as you said, Andrew, I don't work for a big organisation, although I'm working with the fire service at the moment nationally, and so that encompasses all the fire services across the country. So that's quite big. And I've worked with, public sector, private sector, very, very small organizations, startups, and run my own business as well. So I feel that I have a good idea of recruitment and retention and what people are looking for now. So probably very different from when I had my first interview.
Brilliant. We're going to go to the other end of the spectrum relatively, and even though Mahyar said no, we're not very big, you're closing in on 100 employees. Mahyar, tell us about Deepcell yourself, and anything you can remember about being recruited. Again, you're CEO, so maybe you never recruited. Maybe you were never recruited. But over to you, Mahyar. Tell us about Deepcell.
No, I've been recruited a couple of times. So I actually, my history at Cambridge goes back to me being recruited by Microsoft Research. So that was an incredible experience back in the day. And I also worked for Google before starting Deepcell. So I've been sort of recruited by these like behemoth large companies before. And yeah, I've done a couple of companies of my own as well. I want to actually argue that, when you start a company, you sort of like recruit yourself into that. So that's I think that's another way to look at it. Deepcell is a spin-off of Stanford University, where my co-founder, myself, and two of my co-founders were at the time at Stanford. And what we do, we're basically building a machine that identifies and separates cells in a sample based on how they look. So this basically brings the power of microscopy and human intelligence to more conventional cell sorting machines, where you just like separate based on an interaction of a cell with a chemical. So we're kind of like bringing the power of the two together. And yeah, the company is right now, we just raised our Series B. It's around 70 people, and we're just preparing to ship our boxes out there.
Good, right on the edge. I'm going to come back to Becky. Give us a sense, Becky, of how do people know who to recruit? How do they work out who's needed and what skills are missing? Just at a general level, are there any sort of special rules or kind of symptoms, if you like, that a company has that says, yeah, you need to have this recruit? Becky, did you hear me?
I don't think so. I think it really comes. Yeah, I can hear you. I don't know if my signal's great.
I think we've got a bit of a delay, so I'll try and factor that in.
Okay, so you were asking about, are there any kind of specific rules about recruitment?
No, about what sort of people do you need? How do you know who to hire? When do you have to do a skills audit? How do you know who the next person is you need to hire? Is there a simple set of conditions or criteria you can apply to say, yes, you need to hire this person now?
Yeah. I think the simplest rule that I heard, and this was a chap who has a plastic roads company called Macreeba, Tony McCartney, and he said, sack yourself every 90 days. So I think if you start doing jobs and you're doing them more than 90 days, and it's taking you away from working on the business, and you're actually starting to maybe do the marketing or the finance or whatever it is, or the logistics, then you need to sack yourself. So you're constantly thinking about, how can I get myself out of doing this job, or indeed out of this company? How can I get this company to be running by itself so that I can be going off and doing all the other idea stuff? So I think that's probably the simplest rule that I would, or a piece of advice that I would give somebody. So, get somebody else to do those jobs.
Fascinating paperwork on a 90-day cycle. You're sacked again. Peter, I'm going to come to you because you are in the process. You've recruited the first lot. You kind of, I don't know if it's phases. You're into the second lot. You're at this what they say, this chasm bit where you're going from kind of 20 to 30, where everything changes. And so, give us a sense of, how do you know who to recruit next? What's the next recruit, and how do you decide? And is there something obvious you can use to guide you?
Yeah, so I think they're probably thinking about their two main routes that we look at and figure out where we're missing gaps. The first is, when we're sitting at 20 people, moving to 30, you look at the bottlenecks because you already have got quite a wide skill set in a startup at that stage, and you can identify where often you're running things in a serial manner with a couple of individuals, and you know that if you can parallelize that into multiple individuals, you can scale that up. So that's the first section. So looking for these bottlenecks and knowing and expanding, and that's actually much easier because you kind of know what you're dealing with, you know what you're looking for, etc. The next piece is quite tricky, is that other component, which is the skill sets that you don't have that you need to get to the next round of funding or the next milestone. And I think what I've seen quite frequently in startups that I've worked in is planning too far ahead in that, and maybe that talks a little bit to what Becky mentioned. You actually need to think fairly short term to go, what is it the skill set that I need in the next 6 months or 12 months or even 18 months, whatever it is, and hire for that. I've seen people thinking and asking questions, should I hire this person knowing that they're going to be great in 2 years' time? No, you need to hire them to get you to the next point. And you can do some skills mapping based on what you're looking to achieve, but it's quite tricky to get that right.
Interesting. So recruit for now, effectively, is what you're saying. Don't recruit necessarily for the future, but I guess that changes. Mahyar, you're a bit further on to this. I mean, have you devolved recruitment to someone? Is someone else in charge of recruitment now, and you just kind of look on gladly, saying you're not involved with it, or are you still involved?
No, I'm still pretty involved. And
so if you are, then how do you know who the next person? Do you have a clear pathway for recruiting the next 2, 3, 10 people?
I have 3 categories of recruiting. So category number 1 is known needs, right? So you know that you need somebody, you go and recruit them. Category number 2 is unknown needs. And for unknown needs, I typically rely on mentors and like people who've done this before and be like, hey, you actually need an HR at this stage of the company. And we're like, what is HR? Like, I don't care about HR. And we're like, no, you do need that, right? So that's the second one. And then the third one, which I like to do more of that, is when I come across somebody that is just stellar, I cannot have them not part of this company, even though I don't have a role for that person. I just bring that person and be like, well, you come and like figure out your role in the company.
Wow, that's exciting. And does without being too, does that generally work? In terms of you get someone saying, I don't know what you're going to do, but come in and find the job for yourself. Does that tend to turn out to be successful?
Some of my best recruits have been that. I have to confess, it's not many of them. Like, they're just like, you don't come across them every day, but if you do, don't pass on them.
No, fantastic. That's really interesting. So known ones, unknown ones, and then sort of, I don't know, mystery ones in a sense, right? Brilliant. So I'm going to stay with you for a second, which is, because I want to talk about, everybody says, where the heck do you find recruits? In a world where effectively there's, certainly in the UK now, there's more jobs available than there are people to fill them. How on earth do you find the right people? What mechanisms do you use to recruit the next set of people? Are there techniques you've used? Do you use agencies? Do you use employees? Give us a sense of what you do when you're looking for the next person. Yeah.
So I think to this date, the most effective way of recruiting for me is network and network of network. So that's really the best. And that's because there's a lot of trust that goes into being recruited both ways. Networks give you that kind of trust. But then in addition to that, I wouldn't actually discount the power of just, tools like LinkedIn or like, other recruiting. If you actually have the time to go through the resumes, some of our best recruits, they just apply on our job site or LinkedIn and all.
So I'm just going to ask a bit more about the networking thing, because everyone says go networking, but what do you actually do? Do you go into a network and say, hey, everybody, I'm looking for a CTO. Anyone know anybody? Or is it there's a sort of subtler way of saying, hey, I've got this job. Do you know anybody? How do you enable a network to go and look for you?
Yeah, so I don't believe in the act of networking per se, right? So you don't go to a place to just go and network, right? Networking is more like an investment. You make an investment, in 10 years before, and then, after 10 years, some of your investments kind of like have returns.
Right.
So I actually like to think that, when you do network, you don't need to count. You don't need to count like if this is, the right networking opportunity for me. Like, you don't go there targeted. You actually go there to meet people, and first and foremost to help people, right? So because if you do help people, you get help in return.
Right, and you're basically laying the message out that you have vacancies. Peter, can I ask you the same question? You perhaps in a slightly more complicated situation. I don't know if it's harder for you to recruit or easier if you're an early stage company. Where do you find people, and what clever techniques do you have?
Yeah, so I agree with Mahyar that networks are great for that. When you're building a startup early, you don't have those networks, so it takes time to develop them, and I think investing in that is really, really valuable. So I think we take quite a targeted approach depending on what we're looking for. If we're looking for developers, and tech team, we don't look on LinkedIn. They seem to get approached very actively all day from recruiters. So you need to find them, and networks is great for that one if you've got them. But I think being a startup, specifically if you've got something that has some good feeling to it, like rare diseases and anything that's health orientated or biotech, and a lot of the things like listening to your speaker from last week, there's anything that looks green and is positive in the future, it's quite easy to attract, and that's a big edge that you can capitalize on. Beyond that, you can't pay the rates that maybe Google and Microsoft research can. I'm not sure exactly what they're paying there, but you're battling and you're looking for that level of talent. You're really looking for stellar people, and you need to attract them in on different mechanisms. So being in a startup, you can attract people in by telling them that they get a bit more say in the direction of the company, and a lot of people like that. You of course can put the equity card on the table, and I do that with all the employees that I bring into startups. So you have a couple of edges that you can use. But beyond that, finding these people really targeted. We have used recruiters in some of the fast-moving startups, especially when I've pushed things into the US and I haven't got a network there, then I need to really find people. I have lent on recruiters, but I don't generally like to lean that way if I can avoid it.
Interesting. So Becky, I'm going to come to you as the sort of person that has eyes on so many of these companies. Are there good ways and bad ways, or is it totally dependent on the sort of company you are? I mean, are there kind of things that people should definitely be doing and definitely not be doing?
I think, I would add to what's been said really, is thinking about what you need, and thinking about, fishing where the fishes are, and thinking about, where are those people hanging out? Where are they? Are they going to be on LinkedIn? Are they going to be graduates? You can get a lot of talent there. Are they going to be, through recruiters? And depending on the role and the level of the role, there will be different sites. I don't think there's any hard and fast rules really necessarily on an absolute no or absolute yes, apart from the obvious things. But I think it's being really specific about, what do I actually need this person to do? Who am I really looking for? Where do I really need to fill a skills gap? And then tailoring the job description and the personal specification to that. So being really clear on what you want.
Have you found many companies that recruit through their own employees or incentivize employees to find other employees? Is that a common way to do it?
I'm not sure how common it is. I know some companies do that. So yeah, there will be that incentive. And I think, as Peter was saying as well, there are incentives of whether there's equity, shares. Again, I think it really depends on what you're looking for, and matching that with what's there. Millennials will be looking for something very different. They'll be looking to make a difference. They will be really thinking about the values and the mission of the company, and that might be the reason that they're attracted. Some people may just be attracted by the salary package. Some people will be attracted by the greater good, so they'll want to work for an organization like the NHS or the fire service or something like that, and they won't be looking for maybe career progression. So you're wanting to really understand, matching their values and your values to see if it's a good fit.
Yeah, fantastic. So I wanted to move on a little bit to the actual recruitment process now. There's an apocryphal story that says that the recruiter has a stack of CVs, takes the top half off and puts them in the bin and says, I don't recruit unlucky people. Give me a sense of Peter. How do you, when you've got a bunch of people, how do you select them? What are you looking for? And I know that may be, you know, a range of things. But give us a sense of, you know, of what kind of criteria you're using when you've got similar people, if you like, who may have similar skills.
Thanks. So I think we break that down probably into two main pieces beyond that. So the first is if there's any technical skill set required for that role, we'll try and filter for that up front. So coming back to the tech example, we use a couple of tools that are available to send out tests to anyone that comes through. So we try and use that as a filter.
Are they your tools or are they public tools? The public tools.
Public tools, and if you put me on the spot to give you a name, I'll get it wrong. But there are a few out there that you can use. Maybe Mahyar is a bit more familiar with them. But we use these things up front. And the second most important piece, possibly even more important, is culture. You know, if that individual fits with the culture, or is you know, if they don't fit, it is really detrimental to companies. So that's a huge piece of that interview process that we lead up to. You know, and then beyond that, we're looking for the actual pieces of the puzzle within that individual themselves. Do they look like a fast user? Are they optimistic? Actually, that's a really important one. I think in a young startup, you never want a pessimistic person, because that, you know, it's probably part of the culture in interviews. But you know, you need to find that frame of mind. You need to find someone who's happy at these young levels and at these growing levels to do things that are slightly beyond what that individual might do at a very big company. You know, they need to get involved across a broader spectrum. So we've got quite an array of these things, and we follow. Depending on the role, you know, I think at our level, you have to be fairly opportunistic at how you put these people through interviews. We will put possibly 2 or 3 interviews, 4 interviews if it's a really big role, and they'll be through different people ultimately at the end of the day.
Interesting. And so have you been fooled by anybody who's managed to sort of like to scam your system and can say, yeah, I'm really fitting with your culture and I've got all the skills, but when they turn up on day one, they're totally the opposite? Has that happened?
Yeah, I think you always need to be aware, and that is always going to happen. There's no way that you're always going to get it right. And I mean, I've been fooled very in huge ways in the past. You know, like I suppose the biggest way that I've been fooled is I had a problem with an individual that had a big drug problem, and that's a hard thing to deal with, actually, and very hard to pick up in the early interview stages and all the way through. So it only manifests itself in a later stage. So you will always get these things. I think possibly we'll touch on it a bit later, but dealing with that and offloading these individuals in a constructive but fairly quick manner is always important.
Interesting. Good. Mahyar, tell us, perhaps it's different in the California recruiting people, where people just littering the streets. You can just go and pick them off next to the Starbucks, can you, and go, hey, you can have a job. We're not quite as the movies pick it out. So tell us about your experience of recruiting in California.
There are so many of us trying to pick up the same people, right?
Exactly. So, you're bidding for them outside Starbucks. Right?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we start usually with the hard skills. It's kind of like a Maslow hierarchy, you know, first hard skills, then the soft skills, and then I have to agree that the culture is perhaps the top of the pyramid, and to me, a more important one than the other two.
And how do you know that they don't fit culturally? Are there obvious signals to you? I mean, you just go, is it the way they walk or where they talk, or what is it? What is it a signal, if you like, that a cultural fit is a bit of a problem? So
one part of it is like, what is your own culture that you're trying to build, right? So you have to be really clear about that. And too many companies are not even clear about that themselves, right? So, but for me, one big thing that I would try to understand during the interview process is whether the person has the ability to learn. Because you don't come with all the skills and all the knowledge that you need in the job, and you have to learn that during the job. So we try to get a sense of that during the interview. And I think, believe it or not, what happens outside the formal interview session is more important for the culture. So we try to like take them to a dinner, to a lunch, just like try to get to know the person on a more personal basis than just the interview session.
And again, have you someone got through that you didn't want to, and they kind of turned out to be a bit of a nightmare when they turned up?
Yeah. I mean, it always happens, right? And I think that's part of the process. You have to just react quickly. I think the most challenging ones are when you make a mistake with a senior person, because it takes a while for that person anyway to be productive in a senior role. And they have an impact on like the rest of the company. So those are even more important.
Interesting. Becky, I'm going to come to you. I keep on asking you sort of general questions, so I apologize for that. But I mean, are there any kind of rules of thumb when it comes to recruitment? I mean, are there sort of best practices or anything that you've seen that kind of in some way helps you to make sure you're recruiting the right person?
Was that for me, Andrew?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, there's a delay.
There is a weird
Sorry, yeah, so
I feel like we're reporting
best
on
practice,
BBC.
obviously there's all the,
You carry on. I won't.
no, I'm sorry, it might be my internet, but I think, okay, so I think absolutely best practice, and there's all the legal side of, you know, not discriminating against people, and, you know, understanding the law in recruitment, what you can ask, and, you know, how you can advertise, etc., etc. So there's all those things as well. I think lots of organizations now, as that I see, use things like personality profiling as well, to understand how that person is going to fit into a team, maybe, you know, and they might be looking for people with certain traits. They may need, you know, we know that we need to have very diverse teams. We need those people who are inspirational and full of ideas and, you know, can galvanize a whole group. And then we also need those people who are the completer finishers, who are very concise and considered and will get really, you know, really reflect and get really deep into a problem. So I think that's one of the things that I would be suggesting, is that if you can do that at the beginning of the process, or you have some understanding and use some of those tools, there's lots on the market, to see, well, how is this person really going to fit into this role? Some of the tools will actually overlay the personality profiling with the role. You can actually set, you know, you can set those. Some of them will look at more of, you know, a team dynamic. Some of them look at traits. Some of them look at behaviors. So I think those can be really, really useful. And again, you know, picking up on what Mahyar was saying, it's that personal touch. It's that, you know, maybe going out for lunch with that person and connecting with them on a human level and saying, well, you know, could I actually work with this person? So there's a lot of research now that will show us that having friends at work is really productive. It's really efficient. It makes for better teams. You can collaborate, you can trust that person. So I think that shouldn't be underestimated either, that human element of actually, will I get on with this person? You know, so it's taking all of that into account. It's of course, they need to have some skill, but again, as Mahyar was saying, you know, you can hire a person and you can teach them, you know, your culture and, you know, specific to what you're looking for. You can't really teach personality or values or capability or engagement. And so I think those things for me are probably more important than skill.
Interesting, very interesting. So there's a kind of mix between, there's potentially some theoretical or sort of academic ways to assess people, but ultimately it's always got to be balanced with behavior. I mean, how do they actually perform? They may be able to somehow swing the test, but actually when it comes to it, it's kind of what they ask, what they order for dinner that might be more indicative in the end. Fantastic. I'm just noticing, if you do have any questions for anyone on the panel, then do use the little, down the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A function here. So if you have any questions, what we'll do at the end, we'll have a session of Q&A. We'll keep the conversation going until then. But if you have any questions, just stick them in that box there, and then we can use them as a screen when we come to the end. I want to know a little bit about what we often find is that recruitment is one side of the hill and induction is the other side of the hill. So you can promise all kinds of things within your recruitment interview. The question is, does it come to fruition on the day that the person turns up? So Mahyar, can I ask you, give us a sense of what your induction process is like? What works? What doesn't work? What disasters have you had, or is it perfect, your induction? Now you've got so many people, you know exactly how to do it.
So I want to understand what you mean by induction.
Yeah, the first day when they come in.
Is it a term that you guys use there? Is it
yeah,
like
probably.
onboarding?
I don't know. I thought it was an American term. There you go. Who knows? It's about how do you bring people into the organization once they've been recruited? How do you engage them within the organization? What's the process of introducing to the company? bringing them into their
Yeah, the
environment.
popular term here is onboarding for that.
Onboarding.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. I'm sure there'd be something interesting like American, but yes, onboarding or induction in the dictionary it'd be one and the same, I think. But anyway,
Right,
onboarding.
right,
Let's get back to it. How do
and
you
I apologize.
onboard?
I'm not a native English
Don't
speaker,
apologize.
so-
We are two nations. We share a single language, sort of.
Right, right. I think onboarding is very, very important. And the reason that it's important, well, as soon as, you have that person on your payroll, in a constrained startup, you're paying for that person. But even more important than that, it gives the person the first impression of how your company is running, and like what level of standard they're expected to run. Because if your onboarding is broken, that's a very bad first impression that you give to your individual. So having said that, it's hard to have streamlined induction onboarding, right? I mean, you actually have to invest on those processes, and that's one of the things we're doing right now. We're actually revamping our induction process, and kind of asking in the first week of somebody gets hired, we ask what was broken, and it was really interesting. It is interesting to see those responses, because it's informative of how we need to change our processes.
Wow. So just give us a sense of what happens now if I join your company tomorrow. What would happen to me?
So nothing terrible, hopefully.
Well, I'm glad about that.
But one thing that we've done recently, and it works really well, is to pair you up with a buddy in the company. Because that way, you can just, for all your random question, you go and talk to someone who's gone through this before. We also have a specific channel on Slack that says ask anything, and there's no shame to ask questions, and that's a popular channel for the new people to go and ask their questions. And then every bit makes a difference. So for example, just if the fact that if I hire a developer, from the day that they're hired to the day that they can actually code in our environment, that number of days is important, and it's a metric that we have to minimize, because they need to set up the right environment and all of that. So yeah, all of those.
Yeah, fantastic. You're going to confuse the hell out of your people when you go back and say, we've got to sort out the induction process. They're going to go, what have you been doing, mate? Where's your language gone? Peter, I'm going to ask you the same thing. I guess I don't know if you've established a standardized onboarding process. I'm going to say it now, you see, man. Onboarding process. Have you got there yet? Have you established what's good for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is probably one of the things that separates a small startup from someone who's entering the scale startup phase, is that if you can, you're going to be onboarding people on a regular basis, and the quicker you can align them with the culture, make sure that they understand where everything is, how to get everything, and as Mahyar said, bring them up to speed, that they become operational, is hugely beneficial beyond just the first impressions and that, which is really, really important. So I think it's something that I've always paid quite a close attention to in this phase. We try and as Mahyar said, we learn every single time. And if someone says, ask us a question, how do I find this information? Then we know, oh, we've missed that somehow in this induction process. Let's make sure that. So we have a dedicated individual that helps onboard people, and that's generally administrator of some form that has a formulaic approach to all of these things, all the information. And then in that first week, we try and make sure that individual sits in meetings. I mean, I think part of this discussion is also, how do you do this virtually, which is currently the world that we live in. And we try and get these individuals to meet close people within their teams, beyond that, and deeper into the organization as well. We will try and set up some form of social engagement fairly soon after people join. I think Becky said it nicely. We need to make sure we can work with these people when we're hiring, but when we do, it's really important to me that you create that sort of bonding that'll enable people to feel that they can behave in the way they want to behave, and really take some risks in the roles, which is really important for us. And so we push that quite actively.
fantastic. And are you adjusting it all the time? Is it sort of improving a bit like Mahyar saying, what's wrong with it? You know, are you asking all the time, hey, my computer doesn't work or whatever?
100%. I think a big piece of this puzzle is the information governance in a company anyway. Right. And when a new person joins, you really quickly realize where your gaps are, because they're asking for things and you think that should be very easy to find and you should know, you know, so we're always really learning and living. I think what we've instilled in the company, what I'm trying to instill at the moment, is that as soon as something is questioned, go in and fix it, get it up to date, and you know, take it forward, because it's really useful to keep it as a living, breathing piece of the company.
Yeah, fantastic. Becky, I'm going to come to you. I don't know if you can answer the question, but you're interesting to know how organizations like the fire service do this recruitment. Have they perfected it? I mean, they must be recruiting hundreds of people a year, right? I mean, have they got a special way, or any organization that is at a scale? I mean, how do they do it?
I think they have a whole recruitment team, so they have lots of people doing it. They advertise in the right places. They know where a typical firefighter might be. They're less likely to be on something like LinkedIn, and so they have, you know, they go out to colleges as well, and so they're looking for apprentices, so they're looking at, you know, at probably a younger age group, and they have a really kind of robust induction process. There is some research that tells us that the longer the induction, the longer the employee will stay. So it's really important to get right. And there's lots of, I mean, they have a buddy system. I've seen it work, you know, very well in some places and not, you know, not great in other places. I think it relies on the allocated buddy to actually go and do the legwork and, you know, go and find that person at lunchtime and say, hey, you know, come and have lunch with me or whatever it is. And if that's not happening, yeah, it doesn't work so well. I actually wrote an induction booklet recently for a biotech startup that I was working with, and they went from something like 30 to 80 in about 6 or 7 months. And that induction program was about 3 months long, and it included things like meeting with all the departments. So each department had to give a presentation on what they did and how it fitted in. And there was a whole skills and training assessment. Well, what training do you think you might need? And there was the personality profiling. So I think, you know, there's lots of options. I think the more time you invest in that induction, the more comfortable that person's going to be, the more understanding they're going to have, the quicker they're going to get up to speed. They're going to understand how their job fits with the other departments and what everyone else is doing. Even simple things like, who are those people? Who fits in that office? You know, where do I find XYZ for, you know, whatever I need? What is the process for, you know, reordering some staples or whatever you need, you know? So and I think it's all those things that take time and cause bottlenecks, and you know, a person needs to feel that they're part of the organization. So a good induction will do that.
Mm-hmm. I realized through this conversation, one of the things I wanted to ask, which I missed out, which I might just roll back on, is, so part of this recruitment and obviously induction is, I don't know if you call it this D&I, Mahyar. What does that mean to you? D&I policies. You have that? That's not a Californian. So discrimination and inclusion policy. How do you make sure that you are recruiting diversely and inclusively? Is that something you do consciously, Mahyar? You're going to say yes, I'm sure, but tell us how you do it.
Yeah, no, this is very, very important for us. And I think it's important not just because we want to be diverse, but it's because I think a company would be stronger if it's diverse, right? So I think, well, number one part of this is we have to be clear why, like, we need to have inclusion and diversity in the team, and like the executive management needs to be clear on that message. And then like how we do it, we try to be intentional about that, meaning we try to sort of tell our recruiting partners that, hey, we actually care about diversity, and these are the ways we want to add diversity to the team. I've seen some companies that they try to match the diversity goal with having more junior hires with that diversity group, which I completely sort of disagree and despise that practice.
Just a way of getting around the rules, is it, effectively?
Exactly. Yeah. I think you actually need to bring your diversity hires at all levels, and that's the way to actually build real diversity in the company.
And just a question. It's not necessarily easy, presumably, to do this. Particularly, say you've got lots of men in your organization, you're trying to find women. I mean, how do you go about balancing that out? I mean, are you just focused on trying to find women who fit the spot, or whatever is missing for your organization? Do you have a strategy that really focuses on that, and that kind of links back into how do you recruit? I mean, what do you do about that?
It's easier to build in diversity earlier on and kind of like build on top of that. For instance, my co-founder and our CEO is a woman, right? And that's a big attraction for everybody. We actually had one of the best hires coming from best companies, and they were, let's say, women, and they were like, actually, one of the attraction for this company is like all my life I've been working with like men, right? I had men as my boss,
right? And
now this is a great opportunity for me to report to a woman CEO.
Right.
So I think it's very it's a lot more effective and easier to build that diversity early on in your core team, and then it's much easier to scale that up.
Fantastic. That's interesting. I was saying for you, Peter, I guess with smaller numbers, it becomes you have to it's more acute, I suspect. If you have an imbalance, it becomes more obvious, does it?
Absolutely. It's a challenge for smaller companies to figure out mechanisms to enable the diversity. I think, as Mahyar said, we focus on it intentionally. There are one or two other things that I think are really important, specifically looking at attracting women into these jobs, is looking at maternity leave and those types of things, which is very difficult for a startup. But as soon as you start dialing up and focusing and getting those things right, I mean, there's a lot of research that I've seen recently about how flexible working time attracts more women than other things. And there was quite a big piece of research done looking at even job descriptions. If you include things like flexible working time, you attract a bit more of a diverse field. Mm-hmm. So we really try and take that quite seriously. I've always been an advocate of bringing in things like the maternity leave a little bit earlier than general startups at an earlier phase do, because I think it makes a big difference.
Very interesting. And Becky, again, I mean, I can't imagine this is not something you must pick up every single day. This diversity and inclusion issues. Are there ways to do it that are simple, or is it just always going to be something that's complicated to include? Becky, again.
I think probably the simplest thing is that diversity breeds diversity. So, one thing I would say is don't have one person making those decisions, because they will be unconsciously biased. They will not understand, they will not see things from different perspectives, different age groups, different genders, etc., etc. So I think if you're doing anything, lots of organizations now will have to do EQIA assessments on their processes, on their recruitment.
You have to tell us what that is. What's EQIA?
So equality impact assessment. Yeah, so a quality impact assessment. So if you if you are doing an assessment on a process like recruitment, don't have just one person doing it, because they will, just by the nature, I'm a woman, I'm white, I grew up in this country, I will have all of these unconscious biases that I don't even realize, and I will not be, I will not be breeding diversity. So I think, as Mahyar is saying, if you start early, have a diverse team, and it will breed diversity. And as you have all of those different nuances within your team, you will get all of that different input, and you'll get another perspective. So absolutely, you can attract different groups by advertising in different ways. So certainly the flexible working hours is going to open up a whole new group of people that you may not have, or if you can work from home, if you can work remotely, if you can make it diverse, you will attract, you know, a more diverse set of people, and that makes for really good teams and, you know, lots of new ideas.
Fantastic, fantastic. Good. Peter, I'm going to switch tracks again. So I'm coming. You're interviewing me for your company, and I say, how much are you going to pay me? And your answer is.
So how much do we have? But no, I think it's a mixture of understanding the market, and that can be tricky in itself. You know, once you've got your foot in the door and you've got a few people maybe of the same caliber, and you see that moving around, you can get a feel for that.
Right.
Generally, you know, I'll give you a nice example. When we push things into the US from the UK, you get quite a shock on what the salaries look like on that side. So you go in there and you lowball it, and you quite quickly have to adjust. You will get a feeling from the market that you're going on, and you'll adjust your budgets up in that case. So I think, you know, what we generally try and do is we try and keep it similar to what we think other startups would be able to pay that individual. We try and match, you know, with the equity as a big piece of the puzzle, as I've mentioned before. But it is a discussion between you and those individuals, and it really depends on the value that you think they're going to bring, and hopefully you can take them forward. It's beautiful if you can tie their remuneration to some form of goal, and you know, unlock things if you achieve certain milestones in the next few months. So we try and do that where we can.
So just, I want to drill a bit into the equity. I mean, how does that work in your organization? I mean, does everybody get access to equity? On what kind of basis is it, and how do I earn it? And, you know, am I going to become a billionaire as a result?
So it depends what happens with the company, but so generally with all of the startups, we have a policy where anyone who joins in these earlier phases, we will give them some degree of equity. Some of that discussion depends on where you are between your series raises. You know, a lot of the equity pools are generated at each raise, so it's quite a juggle looking forward when you're closing a raise and saying, right, I'm going to hire so many people within this next round. And I've got this chunk of equity, how are you going to split it up? And then you need to start thinking carefully about those different roles and what you need to attract that. So that's quite a science in itself. So, you know, sometimes you're a bit hamstrung by you getting close to a raise, you haven't got a huge option pool available, and you need to be nimble around that, but you can work on discussions beyond that point when the next raise comes through, etc. So it is a juggle. Generally, people that are in the upper tiers of the management within that structure will get more equity than the lower tiers, but that I think would be expected anyway.
Brilliant. And Mahyar, again, you know, you're living in the home of all of this stuff in terms of how do people get remunerated. So assuming you're going to pay me the going rate and you're going to give me some equity, how else do you attract me into your company? What else is that part of that package of stuff you're going to give me? Do you give me, you know, a hairdresser every week, or massage, or I don't know, haute couture food or something? What is it you do to attract people? I mean, do you have to go above and beyond? And if you do, what do you do?
Yeah, no, actually, this is a good question, because I do believe, and I've seen it in practice, that not everything that attracts people has a monetary value. Like, you know, sometimes, you know, I just send them a personal note or a bottle of champagne or whatever, and you know that means a lot to them. You know, that there was one instance that the person had a sick child, and we just send them a care package during the interview process. So I think those mean a lot. On the compensation piece, I think it's really important to be consistent, and because a lot of people they care more about being treated consistently with everybody else in the company than to be given a certain compensation package. So I think that's important. And then the last piece I would add is not everybody values your offer the same way, and that's a good thing, because you want a little bit of self-selection in the process. You want to attract the people who value your equity, because they're gonna make your company valuable in the end of the day, not those who are looking for the cash that you got in exchange of your equity of the company.
Yeah, interesting. So Becky, and I saw quite a lot of research recently about this whole thing about what is the most important thing when people are recruited, and often money is not even the top five. It's often about purpose, or Am I motivated, or is it something else? I mean, do you get a sense of, you know, particularly with the younger generation, perhaps, what kind of things are they looking for that, you know, that aren't money?
Absolutely. Money is, there's a really fantastic MIT study that shows that mastery is actually the motivator. And I think Daniel Pink has done a lot of work on this, hasn't he? What we're motivated by, but it certainly isn't money. And I think, well, money, you know, money means different things to different people anyway, doesn't it? What does that money buy you? Does it buy you choice? Does it buy you security? So I think if you can have an understanding of what's important, and I go back to this point again, what is important to that person, you can match that up. But it's things like purpose, the same as a customer, I suppose. So I was at a talk with Lisa Hogg. So she's works for Tom's, you know, the shoe company, and they have this real incentive within their organization where there's a kind of a scheme where you can you get some of the company money. I can't remember the exact details, but you can choose a charitable project each year. So you can kind of pitch within the organization and you can win this lump sum from the company Tom's, and you can go and be, you know, the person that runs that charitable project. And I think it's things like that. People want to feel that they are making a difference. So whereas your customer isn't just buying a service, they're buying the shoes, and they're giving the shoes to somebody who needs the shoes. It's the same for employees. They want to feel that they are making a difference in something that matters to them, so some greater good, but also they want to be learning. So, you know, I think, Mahyar, you mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs earlier, and right at the top of that is self-actualization. We need to be able to learn. We need to be able to self-actualize, and it's not something that you arrive at, it's an ongoing thing. So there's not many people, I think, who want to be, you know, who were told, okay, here's your job and this is what you're going to do forevermore. I don't think that would motivate a lot of people. So they want to be able to see career progression. They want to be part of something bigger. They want to be able to know that they're making a difference. And then I think one of the cheapest incentives that you can give to people, and it's probably the thing that they want most, is freedom and flexibility to work the way that they want to work. And I think a lot of organizations overlook this. It's a free benefit. We're kind of past clocking in and, you know, adding up somebody's hours. We're more task focused now. We will check in with somebody. We're not checking up on them. And that is a very simple free benefit. You give the employee your trust, and you give them your trust and you give them that freedom, and they are much more engaged. It's almost a reverse effect. They are much more engaged in working hard for you. If we're thinking in those kind of capitalist terms of how do you get somebody engaged in working hard, you give them more freedom, and it's actually free to give. It doesn't cost you as an organization.
I'm sure we could have a very long session on all of that. This thing just splinters off into all kinds of places. I'm going to we're kind of almost getting towards the end of our time. I did want to deal with one thing, which is one of the things you don't realize about running a company is how you get rid of people. And I don't mean that in the horrible way, but when people don't fit, or they do things wrong, or they don't match, or they can't do the job, how do you go about doing this? Peter, have you had to do this? And give us a sense of good and bad, or maybe just good. We don't really need to know about the bad. The bad we can probably imagine. What does a good leaver in this sense look like, or a good recruitment out look like?
I think the easiest ones are the ones where the individual realizes that they don't fit themselves, because it's an easy conversation that they partly have opted to go in that direction. So those are the easy ones,
right?
And that makes an easy transition. The difficult ones are those that aren't expecting it. I try and deal with these any team issues. In my opinion, there has to be a very big piece of respect amongst any team. And I think this is a case where I've seen a lot of things falling to pieces where this isn't handled with respect. It's quite tricky in some cases if you've got problems. But yeah, if you can handle this with respect that each individual deserves, generally you will come out with a good outcome. You will always get, if you're dealing with someone who isn't aware of this, I'm always in the light of thinking you have to lead them up to that point. You need to try and correct things while you can try and correct them. If you realize that it's uncorrectable or if it's costing too much time and effort, then you need to act swiftly. And I think that's something that young people who are running startups don't realize how swiftly you should be acting in these cases. They try and fix, they try and drag things along to try and see, or they're too nervous to take the steps. And I think that can really lead to problems. So swiftness, respect, I think those are a few of the key words that I would say. Yeah.
Absolutely. Mahyar, I'm going to ask you the same thing. Have had to do it recently? Had to get rid of anybody?
Yeah, I mean, it has happened, and it has
Part of life, right?
Yeah, that's part of it. Yeah, well, one thing I would say is this is one of the hardest thing that I need to do, or executive need to do in a company, because in the end of the day, we're human and we build human bonds, and it's as well, I don't want to say as hard, but is also very hard for the person who has to let somebody go, as it is hard for the person who's being let go. So that's one thing. I want to say that in many cases, it's not about the person being a bad hire, and especially in a company that's scaling up and evolving. It's more often than not that the person is appropriate for a certain period in the company, but then after that period is over, either the person cannot scale to the next level, or it's not attractive to that person. So or for the company. So in many cases, we have to realize that this is part of the evolution of the company, and we have to embrace that. So that's one thing. And then I agree with what Peter said, that it needs to be done with utmost respect, and it has to be done also very swiftly. Like there hasn't been one case that I felt like, we fired somebody too quickly. It's always the case that you let go of someone too late, and you always know that that's not the way.
Do you call it offboarding by any chance?
I don't. Maybe I should.
I'm joking. Becky, any views on this? Any views on good ways to remove people? Are there any good practices?
I think, yeah, I mean, certainly it shouldn't be a shock to that person. So if you're having those continuous one-to-one conversations, it really shouldn't be a shock. So I think that's the first thing, is that you are having those continuous conversations. Another good practice is that you are, recording some of parts of those conversations. If there is a performance, incident, if you have gone down the performance management route, if there is any disciplinary, etc., that you've recorded all of that there's somebody else involved. So that's just really good practice, making sure, even if it's we had reflecting back to somebody and emailing and saying, just to recap on the meeting that we had this morning where this happened, you're always identifying the behaviors. So it's never personal. So you can be respectful in that way. It's not against, someone's personality. It's the behavior, the capability, the skill, etc. So it shouldn't really be a shock. And I think, a good way to do it is, you can also use this process of having the third position of the business is the third position. So it's not I am doing this to you, it's the business need is X, Y, Z, and therefore because the business is this and your role is that, there's no longer a fit. So that kind of removes the element sometimes if somebody feels it's a personal attack on them, it's not you criticizing them, or of course there are incidences. I worked with an organization recently who, it's a kind of funny story, but I think it's on the increase, who had an employee who was actually working full-time for their company and another company. And obviously this is largely as a result of the pandemic and this, lots of this hybrid working, that you can be invisible, you can be online, but you're not really working. And so that the way he was found out, he was actually on a team meeting on like this, on a Zoom call, and his phone went and he forgot to put it on mute. This is a true story. And he had a whole other conversation, got back to his Zoom call, at which point a couple of people said, just call him Dave. Is there something that you want to
tell us?
So, that was
fantastic.
That was almost,
how to get caught very easily, yes. Good. We
I
almost
also want to
time.
just add, I'm sorry, just one thing I forgot. I think if you can afford to offer severance to people who are being let go, it's a great thing. Sometimes offering that severance early on and having them gone is actually cost less for the company than having them around because you don't want to offer the severance.
Yeah, there's a real interesting economic model to build around that. I agree. We're sort of out of time. I want to ask one last question each of you. Mahyar, I'm going to start with you. You can't work at your company anymore. You've got to go and work for another company. Which company would you like to go and work for if salary wasn't an issue? Which company would you go and work for just on the basis of it being a fabulous company?
Um,
and it can't be yours.
I think, well, I don't know if I can come up with a name on the spot, but I will tell you that as I'm growing older and older, I care more about the mission of the company and the culture of the company than other.
That's going to make it for you. The other two probably have something to think about. Becky, would you, if you can't work for yourself anymore, you have to go and work for a company, who would you work for?
Absolutely, 100%. I'd go and work for Patagonia.
Patagonia, wow. And that's just because values and they're doing, trying to do good stuff.
Values, yeah. They live and breathe. They live and breathe their values. So one of their values is environmentalism. So if one of their employees is jailed or arrested for protesting, they go and pay the bail money. And I think I love hiking and I love mountains, and I think it's really cool.
Brilliant. Yeah. Peter, who would you go and work for, Peter?
I'm lucky to be third year, so I'll take some of the anything that would get me into the wilderness would be fantastic. But right. Having met you tonight, Mahyar, if you've got a job open,
Deepcell, number one. Excellent. Right, so we have some more sensible questions coming from the audience. I'm going to run through them fairly quickly. John Henderson asked, in a tight labour market, is the idea that you can recruit innovative people and non-innovative people an expensive and outdated luxury when humans have extensive ability to learn most skills? So should we just recruit and teach, or should we try and recruit specifically, do you think? I'll start with you, Mahyar. What do you reckon?
I think depends on the role and depends on the urgency that you have to fill in the company. Obviously, but I think it's never easy to find somebody who fits exactly what you're looking for. So it's always a better bet to find somebody who can learn and who's willing to learn.
Right, interesting. So yeah, look for some basic stuff, but ability to learn, I think you said it earlier on. Peter, I suspect we know the answer to this. You said recruit for now, but tell us what your answer is. Should we just try and find some basic people and teach them, or innovative or non-innovative? Does it matter?
So I think you're gonna run out of skills in a population before you run out of innovative people. And maybe I think it's easy to confuse this. I would never try and teach innovation. That's a difficult thing to teach. I'm happy to teach skills, but you need to be cautious with that as well. It's quite tricky to bring people up to a level in a short space of time, especially when it puts pressure on your other team members. So yeah, I think specifically with that question, I would be very cautious hiring someone I thought was not innovative into a startup. Yeah, unless the role dictated that.
Oh yeah, no one's allowed to be innovative in this role. Becky, what do you reckon? Is it do you recruit and then teach, or do you recruit for the skill they have?
I think teach. I mean, obviously there's some things that you absolutely need skill for, but I think if I was forced, if I could only recruit for skills or personality, it would be somebody who's teachable and engaged in, people are fast learners when they're engaged in what they're doing.
Brilliant. I'm going to come back to you with Raymond Fayette's question. Can you think of some ways to assess someone's reliability? Becky, I'm going to come back to you. Can you assess reliability? Interesting question. There may not be a specific way.
I don't know that you can assess it particularly. I think it would be matched with their motivations, though. People are going to be more reliable if they're motivated, if they're engaged, if they're on board with what you're doing. So I think if you could, get that indication from the interview and the CV, you'd be onto a good starting point. Yeah.
Peter, how do you assess reliability?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, we
Really?
Yeah, we try to look for indications. Can people meet arrive on time for your meetings and meet all of them? But even that's tricky. People have other lives, and you can't impose too much of that decision on that.
Right.
I think one sign that I've looked at in the past is looking at their CVs to see if they can retain a job for a certain amount of time. It's hard to retain jobs at decent companies if you aren't reliable. Right. So there is that question of how often should I jump between jobs. I know this world we live in is quite frequent, but I think if you see someone who's 3 months, 6 months, 3 months, it's a bit of a red flag in some cases.
Mahyar, how do you can you assess it, reliability?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I can point to a few things that I pay attention to. One is whether the person is open about their vulnerabilities and ability to say, hey, I don't know this, I've never done this before, etc. I think that shows me reliability. Another thing is just very implicit signals during the offer negotiation. Sometimes you just because it's something that people obviously care about, and sometimes show the best and worst of themselves during that. So I think that's another area that I look at.
I'm going to come back to you, Mahyar, with this one, which is from Shazeen Kolasi, who says, I'm going to summarize it. Basically, if someone ends up with a role that's built around them, or they build a role around themselves, how do you go about unpicking it? How do you say that role isn't about a person, it's about a role? Have you had this problem where someone sort of designed a role that only they can fill? Mahyar, I'm going to ask you first.
So rephrase that question again.
I mean, have you come across a problem where somebody has built a job around themselves so that they can't be got rid of because only they can do it?
Yeah, actually, that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right, not a bad thing necessarily.
Yeah, and whether they've done has this thing happened for us? Yeah, to some extent it has. And so what you need to make sure is in place is, okay, what if the person, I mean, it's not even like about the person leaving the company. What if they're just sick, on a day, right? So you need to make sure that you have that skill covered. But generally, I get energized when somebody carves out a role for themselves. I think that makes the person most effective and most retained in the company.
Interesting. Peter, the same question as you. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think the danger of these things, I mean, I think it's, as Mahyar said, there is a lot of benefit if someone carves that out in a positive way. I think the danger can be if someone silos information and silos things, that if anything does happen, that's a major problem. I think one of the steps that happens in a startup from an earlier phase to a bigger phase is a bit of redundancy. Definitely not at the top, but you do get a bit of redundancy, and that de-risks companies in a big way. There's a lot of benefit from having some degree of redundancy. Obviously not wastage, but you at the lower levels you really want to ensure that there's an easy transition if someone steps aside. But I think in the senior management team, you can definitely have people that grow into their roles and grow the role around them for sure.
Becky, have you seen this? Any view on whether it's a good or bad thing? I mean,
yeah, I think generally it's not great to have only one person that can do that role, because exactly if they leave, if they're sick, if something happens to them, as an organization you're a bit stuck. I think but I would agree with Mahyar that if somebody is carving a role for themselves and they are creating something that they are really engaged in, you want to run with that, and you want to work on someone's strengths and say, okay, this is where your strengths lie, and maybe you can fit that role, you can make adjustments, but you really do need to be thinking about your succession planning and who is going to fill that post when that person inevitably moves on for whatever reason. So you need to be always looking at the person behind, or the people behind, and saying, okay, so how can they also start learning that role? What skills will they need coming through? You can do shadowing and mentoring and all that kind of stuff. Yeah,
brilliant. So this is a big question which Debbie puts up, which is, how do you retain company culture in a rapidly scaling company? I'm probably going to ask you for one element. What one thing do you think can help to retain a company's culture? So let's start with Peter. What do you reckon? Do you have a culture? You have a culture now. I mean, I don't mean a biological culture. I mean a physical culture. You have something, and how, is there a way to sort of nurture it, grow it, maintain it, protect it?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say one thing, but if you put me on a spot, which you have done, I'll give you one thing, which I would say probably critical mass, actually. If you have enough people buying into your culture as you grow and ensuring that there is that critical mass, it will self-police itself to some degree. That's my one thing if I had to choose. So it
almost doesn't matter what the culture is, as long as there's enough people that believe in it. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I think that's true. As long as, it's got to align with what the founders want to push. But absolutely, I think if you have enough people on that side, you'll end up with a good outcome.
Fantastic. Mahyar, I guess you have a culture. Can you describe it? Is it something that it kind of revolves around?
Yeah, I mean, we have actually a set of cultural values. I mean, like 5 of them or something like that.
But what is it really like?
And that's the thing. Like, if you just document it and don't live by it, it's a piece of information on a document, right? So that's not going to work, right? So, and the way to promote that is to, like, in every single meeting, in every single outcome, let's actually compare that against your cultural value and reward people who promote them, and demote people if they're going against the cultural value. So you just basically have to live by it.
Are there any kind of signals in your company of what the culture is? I mean, is it sort of, do people wear funny hats on Thursdays or anything like that? I mean, is there something that is an indicator of the culture that people can see?
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you one example, right? So like we have a lot of advanced degree people, and one drawback with advanced degree is you can like drown yourself in data and analysis, and don't make a decisive move into like something that you need to do, right? So one of the cultural values that we put out there was, hey, well, we actually value judgment, the right judgment. And judgment comes with, sometimes you don't have all the data that you wish to have, but you actually need to make a decision, right? So that's one thing we value. And for that, we actually look at how people make decisions decisively and quickly and reward that, right?
Wow. And so that's an obvious, is it published? The decision was made, well, I mean, everybody knows about it, so it kind of spreads. Is that the idea? Yeah. Fantastic, brilliant. Becky, any kind of examples of how a culture is retained that you've seen? I mean, it's a very slippery fish kind of thing, right? Has many aspects. Is there anything that you can remember or is memorable about culture maintenance or embedding?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, culture really is the way we do things around here. So I think the key thing to think about is the verb. It's the doing. It's, it's all very well having a poster with 5 words on the wall, but what do you actually do? So you need to be articulating exactly what are the behaviors that you want to be seeing, or as a company you aspire to see, that go with those words. So what does it mean? And then I was talking to a VC recently about this, and I said, on company culture, we were chatting, and he said, you need to personify that culture. So the leaders need to be demonstrating that. They need to be the ones, being the culture of the organization. So it needs to be in all of the aspects of your business. So it needs to be in your marketing, it needs to be in your reward, it needs to be in your logistics, it needs to be in your people policies. But you really need to be saying, okay, so what behaviors am I looking at? So what behaviors within marketing would I be looking at? If one of my values is trust, I need to be really transparent with what I'm doing as an organization and what I'm doing myself and what we're all, so it's just remembering that it's a verb, it's the doing of, and that is the culture that creates the culture of the way that we do things around here. So if you want to, for example, the fire service, very command and control, they have to be in certain situations. They also want a coaching culture, which is quite autonomous. So they have to be modeling both. And that creates the culture. And people will generally, like children, people follow what the people in authority are doing generally. So, and that creates that we lots of research, I think it's, more than 5 people and you can be swayed. If it's one person doing something, you would disagree, or 2 people, you might disagree. But the studies show that if there's 5 people, even if there's 5 people telling you that black is white, you will go along with it.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's almost like the critical mass thing that Peter's talking about, that if enough people believe it, then it becomes a way of being. Yes. That's what we do around here. Fascinating. Peter,
yeah, we follow, don't we? We heard there's
hopefully, Peter Zip, we've answered most of your question, which is about this concept of cultural fit. I'm going to our last question, which is perhaps you can be as flippant or as honest as you like. How would you view a business school qualification when recruiting? Becky, are they any good having an MBA? Is it useless, or is it absolutely essential when you're being recruited? Or any business, it doesn't have to be an MBA, you can have an MFin or an MST.
I think, I think it's going to show a certain amount of determination, reliability, a certain amount of skill. I think, but I think it's going to come down to, well, is that what you're looking for? Do you want a person who has learnt all of that information from that school? Do you want somebody who is, is that going to create a diversity? If you've got only MBA students, you're going to have less diversity, for example. So I think it does demonstrate, obviously, consistency, reliability, hard work. But it's not the only thing.
Brilliant. Peter, what do you reckon? I've got an MBA. You're going to recruit me? You say,
So I think, in my opinion, it depends on the role specifically. And so having actually done one myself, and I came from genetics and then medicine and then MBA. And so I know the value that it can bring. I think if I'm looking to hire a generalist, it's quite useful to have someone who's done something possibly technical and then crossed over to the business side and learned that side of things. If I see someone coming from a economics background or finance background and then an MBA, I don't think there's that much of a learning that they've gathered in that may not be that useful. So I think it completely depends on the role, but I am favorable, possibly because I've done it and learned a few things.
Kick them out. Yeah. I've got to judge MBA. Oh, no, I'm not having you. Mahyar, business degree or business qualification, or is that not preferred? Is that one of the criteria you look for?
So the way I look at not just business degree, any degree or anything that they've done in the past is like the story behind it, right? I mean, why the person did what they did and what they wanted to achieve with that. I think if the story is consistent and is, something that I like for the company, great. Yeah. If now it's a haphazard move in a in a journey. I'm not saying like I've done all my moves measured. Even like the bravery to say, hey, I've done this because I didn't know anything better to do. That's a positive point to me. But again, I'm looking for that story, not a degree.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely interesting. Peter Zip is a very eloquent questioner, but he's given me a very long question. I'm going to summarize it and say, when you look in the mirror, when you wake up in the morning, Peter, would you recruit yourself? That's a bit hard. I mean, what are you looking for in yourself, perhaps? What is it you're looking to improve, or You know, where are the flaws in yourself? This is very introspective. You don't have to answer.
You're asking a lot.
Would you recruit yourself, or kind of what things you go? I'm not so sure about Peter and that thing.
Yeah, I think it would be hard to lead a company and not feel that you are living bringing all of what you're looking for into the way you work. So yes, right. I think I would recruit myself. That's true. Maybe it is, as Peter said, leaning on the one side, but I think, definitely looking for someone who respects other people in the work. I feel that I do so myself. I feel that I approach things in an innovative way. I feel that I'm reliable. So yes, I think I would recruit.
There's still a personal development plan somewhere there for you, Peter. Becky, would you recruit yourself into your own company? You would. I'm glad you said that.
I would, but not for a long time.
Right.
I think I firmly believe in people developing and moving and not becoming too reliant on one person or too reliant on a role. So I think this goes with my coaching ethos, that you're not creating this reliance on the relationship. So I think I would for a short time.
Right, brilliant. And Mahyar, would you recruit yourself?
Yeah, I already did it, right?
Yeah, I know, but would you recruit yourself today again? Would you? Is there something missing? Yeah. Something missing? If only Mahyar had this extra thing, then he'd definitely be the right person for this job.
Yeah, I wouldn't recruit myself for many of the roles, but for specific ones, yes, I would. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you all for such a stimulating conversation. Sometimes messages about, discussions around recruitment and HR can be a little bit dry. I'm glad to say you've made it all. You've given it many aspects from sack yourself every 90 days. I'll put down there, and recruit people with the ability to learn. Look in the mirror and make sure you can recruit yourself. Thank you all so very much for giving up your Tuesday evenings. It's been a pleasure to work with you today. As I say, it's the last Enterprise Tuesday this term, so we will be back in the autumn with a new set of interesting subjects. So please look out for indications. Thank you again for coming all the way from California, and for Mahyar and for Becky and Peter. Thank you so much. We will be. I'm sure we'll be asking you back at some point in the future for another stimulating conversation. So thanks very much, and good night to everyone.